Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and joining us now is Lee Stranahan. Lee has worked for publications on the left and on the right. He's worked for the Huffington Post. He's worked for Breitbart. He now has a radio show, Fault Lines, on SputnikNews.com, co-hosting that with Garland Nixon. You can find him on CitizenJournalismSchool.com, also on Populist.tv. And Lee wants to join us with some information about an interview that he just had with an individual who has information about how the Ukrainians that were being worked with by the Obama administration, as well as, of course, people like Soros and John McCain, how they were working to try to undermine President Trump going back to 2016. And we've just had some email logs that have been released showing that there was correspondence between Fusion GPS and between Clinton associates and between other people to set up this meeting at the Trump Tower and so forth. There have been multiple pieces of information showing that there were many attempts to try to arrange incriminating meetings. This is the only one that anybody ever took them up on, this particular meeting at Trump Tower. Still, there was no information exchange. There was no money exchange. Nothing happened. There was a promise of, well, we got some opposition research here. They're just trying to taint them by exposure. But I wanted to talk to Lee because he's got some information about somebody that he worked with who had some dealings with Alexandra Chalupa. And you've talked about her before. Welcome, Lee, and tell us a little bit about, explain to the audience who Alexandra Chalupa is, her connections to the DNC and so forth.
Sure, David. First off, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to see you again. Alexandra Chalupa is a DNC operative. She worked in the Clinton White House, and she is at the center of this. And I got to say, when you look at it, this goes back before 2016 even. Now, I first heard about Alexandra Chalupa in a story that was reported on Politico, you know, the establishment publication, and reported by someone who's not on the right, Ken Vogel, who's now at the New York Times. But I think people make a mistake when they just dismiss a source outright. You have to read every story and judge the facts on their own merits. Does that make sense? So,
oh, yeah, that's right.
When I read this story in 2017, January of 2017, by Ken Vogel and David Stern, they talked about Alexandra Chalupa and how the Ukrainians had interfered in the election. Now, I got to point out that what we're saying here, this directly connects to Comey, it connects to the FBI, and it goes back to the 2013, 2014 Soros-funded revolution in Ukraine that was called the Maidan, right? That's where they took the government of Viktor Yanukovych, who, like him or not, corrupt or not, was democratically elected, let's just say that, right? Clearly. Right. And it ended up in a coup that was funded by the U.S. and Soros, fomented by them, and then Yanukovych ended up fleeing. So I will tell you, first off, do you care about, David, you as an American, do you care about Ukrainian politics that much? I don't, right?
No. As a matter of fact, yeah, but people like George Soros and people like Victoria Nuland at the State Department and people like John McCain, they love that. I mean, that's what they live for. The world is their chessboard, isn't it?
That's exactly right. It's not that I don't care about the Ukrainian people the way I care about all people, right? I do.
That's right.
And
we don't want to see them killed for some kind of political Machiavellian game that these people have, for whether it's for power or for money or whatever their objective is. I don't really care. I don't want to see these people's countries torn up into war for that.
That's exactly right. And so I'm not a pacifist, but I'm anti-war, right? And I'm anti-intervention. So what happened was we set this up. Soros set this up. And by the way, Soros is directly involved in the rest of what happened. So we install a government in Ukraine, okay? We also, through the FBI, and this is where Comey comes in, sets up something called NABU, which is the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, which is controlled by the DOJ and the FBI. This is 2014. Now we've put these...
This is what colonialism looks like in the 21st century, isn't it?
Well, not just that, but you're exactly right. And let me amplify that. This is what colonialism looks like when you don't go in with guns and bayonets, but you go in with an Occupy Wall Street style revolution. Does that make sense? That's what Soros has learned.
That's right.
And so we put this government into place. We put Naboo into place. Now cut to 2016. Okay? Alexander Chalupa, according to Politico, according to that story, talked to a guy named Andrei Telushenko. He worked in the embassy. And he was also told by Ambassador Chali, the ambassador, and by a woman named Oksana Shular, who was the head of the embassy, I want you to coordinate with Alexandra Chalupa, this DNC operative. I don't want you to talk to Trump, and I want you to give them dirt on Trump. Now, that's what Politico reported, right? So, you know me, we've talked about this story a number of times, David.
Yep.
For a long time. You and I have been talking about this for over a year, right? Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk to the whistleblower, Andrei Telushenko. So for a year, I have spent, and you know what it's like when someone's a whistleblower, they have a lot of reasons to be afraid, right?
Yes.
So
that's right.
I've tried to talk to Andrei, and about 2 weeks ago, I talked to him for the first time. I mean, I've been talking to him a little bit, but on record, did a full interview. And he amplified everything that I said, absolutely confirmed it. He stands by the story that was reported. Furthermore, don't take my word for it. If anybody just goes to the internet and types in WikiLeaks Ali, like Muhammad Ali, because Alexandra, her nickname is Ali Chalupa, you'll find the email where Ali Chalupa was reporting to the head of communications, director of communications, Luis Miranda. You'll see that email. So this is not just this guy saying it. We have paper proof. This is the collusion and interference. It's with the Democrats and the Ukrainians. And it started before the Russians are even alleged to have started the hack. Now you're seeing there, you guys have put up on screen the CNN story where she denied working with it. Well, I asked him about that. She's denying working with it, but the paper shows clearly she was working with it, with the DNC. She was directly communicating with the communications director. Now, so this is a big deal. And I actually was on with Alex. Once we broke the story on my radio show, the first person I called was Alex Jones. And I said, Alex, I broke this big story. Alex had me on, God bless him, that afternoon, okay? Because I will say this again, not blowing smoke, InfoWars are the only people with the guts to deal with this story.
That's why they shut us down. That's why they shut us down on YouTube and Facebook.
And absolutely. Now, here's what happened. So I talked to the whistleblower, did that interview. He tells me some things that are off the record. So I think about it for about a week. We've developed a relationship now, even though he's not pro-Russian, not pro-Putin, and was worried that I work for Sputnik, was worried. Well, I'll be honest, he was worried about that. He saw my reporting and was like, okay, this guy's honest. I trust him. Then he told me something completely outrageous. How much time before we go to the break, David?
We got just 53 seconds. So you want to wait and hold this until we come back from the break? Or go ahead.
That's right. It's a perfect teaser, don't you think? When we come back, wait till you hear what he told me, David. This is the first time we've talked about this at InfoWars. It's a very big deal, and it ties right into the Steele dossier.
Well, very important, and I can understand his reluctance as a whistleblower because, as I was saying at the beginning of the program, this guy, Henry Kerner, who was a staff member for John McCain, just seems to turn up with all these scandals. Benghazi, Fast and Furious, IRS, the Tea Party persecution and so forth, and begging the IRS to come after political enemies and financially ruin them. And guess who is in charge of vetting the whistleblowers for the special counsel? This same guy who worked with John McCain all these different years. Stay with us. We'll be right back with this bombshell information from Lee Stranahan. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to Lee Stranahan. Lee has been following the trail of Alexandra Chalupa for quite some time. Of course, she is a Ukrainian American. She's worked very closely with the DNC and Hillary campaign, trying to get dirt on President Trump or to essentially frame him. She spoke to a Ukrainian man, who Lee Stranahan has interviewed in the past, and he's given us information about that. But there's more information that's come out. As Lee was able to get this guy's trust, as this guy began to see his reporting, he gave him some more information, And we were about to get to that as we had to go to a break, and so we were left with this cliffhanger as to what this new information is. And I think you've got an audio clip as part of this interview as well, don't you, Lee?
We do. I audio taped the entire thing. Let me just make a side point here before we get to this big stuff. This news story of CNN and what they did with Lanny Davis, where they said that he wouldn't comment, but they quoted him. As a journalist, one of the things that bothers me is anonymous sourcing is an important part of journalism. In other words, when you have a whistleblower, and in this case, you'll see we have two whistleblowers, they are often in danger. Andre is in Kiev, Ukraine, okay? This is a guy who's being threatened. He was threatened with being fired, and he's now the ambassador, Charlie, the ambassador to Ukraine, who John Bolton just met with, has been going around lying about this guy. So as a journalist, people need to understand, if you're in the audience, that when a reputable journalist uses anonymous sourcing, there's a reason for it. So
yeah.
And
what they've done at CNN by doing this, what they did with Lanny Davis, using him as a source, saying it was an anonymous source, and people would expect that since this is information coming from Michael Cohen, they're going to think, well, it's coming from Lanny Davis. So to push back against that, they say, well, and then we talked to Lanny Davis, and he had no comment when he was their source for the story. And so that lie that has come out there has had, and the other part of this too, Lee, is that we've had a lot of things that have come out from CNN, from the Washington Post, that have been attributed to anonymous sources that have turned out to be lies. So this isn't the first time we've seen a lie, but this one with the lie about the anonymous source and then saying, well, we talked to the anonymous source and he didn't have anything. That's really.
And you see what I'm saying? As somebody who does journalism for a living, it makes as soon as people see an anonymous source, which is what we're going to talk about in a second, a lot of people are like, well, wait, that's BS. Now, before we get to the blockbuster info he just gave me, I'd like to play the clip. I have about a minute, a little less than a minute clip. I want people to hear Andre for himself. This is him talking about meeting Alexander Chalupa. That's the clip I sent. So this is Andre, who's in Kiev, Ukraine. This is him. This is the first time when I did this interview, nobody's heard his voice. I recorded the interview. I've got a transcript, and we're going to be publishing that at populist.tv this weekend. But listen to this clip of Andre talking about meeting with Alexander Chalupa. Then I'll tell you what he told me about the Steele dossier.
Yeah, and she asks me, you should talk, guys. You have a lot in common. You should get to know each other well. And Andre, you should help her. And then she backs off, and Alexander Chalupa introduces herself, says, I work for the DNC. And we're working with the Hillary team, and we are working really closely on getting dirt and any information connecting, at that time, presidential candidate Donald Trump and his team, any of his team members, and with Russia or any Russian mafia, as she said. And I was like, why are you looking for that information? Because we plan to have a committee hearing in Congress in September, October, right before the elections.
I want you to think about that, Dave.
At that time, presidential candidate Donald Trump off the election, if we find or we get any dirt within our hands, and that we can use against him.
Wow.
Now, David, think about that. This is before the Russian hack. This is before Mueller's alleging. I don't believe there was a Russian hack, by the way, but let's go with what Mueller says. This is before that. A Democratic operative is saying they're planning to have hearings, but they're planning the hearing. David, if I said to you, hey, David, we're going to have a trial about you. And you said, well, what's the evidence? I said, well, we're working on that.
We're trying to create it right now. We're composing it right now.
What are the charges? We're working on that. This was their game plan, and the game plan started when they overthrew the Ukraine. So there's Andre. You can hear for himself. People can judge. But what he's saying there is he's repeating what Politico reported. So if people don't trust me, right, which is, well, they don't trust me, it's not me. That's Andre saying it. And this is the guy who was quoted in Politico. And by the way, Politico stands by that story. They've never said, no, that's not true. This is what's going on now.
And Politico does not like President Trump. They're not going to give him any. They're not going to construct something that's going to make him look innocent or make it look like they were out to get him.
That's right. Now, so here's what he told me off record that now he's told me on record, and this is the big scoop. He's in Kiev, Ukraine, remember? Okay? And do you remember that Christopher Steele, one of the ways he got involved in this was that during the Maidan in 2013, Christopher Steele was writing reports about Ukraine. Remember that? Mm-hmm. That's an important detail because I'm saying there's some backup for this. Andre told me he personally knows somebody in Ukraine who was contacted by Orbis and told to just make stuff up. I'm going to say that again. Andre, who you just heard him, he knows somebody who worked for George Soros's International Renaissance, who was writing reports for Orbis and was told they came up with research and they sent it to Orbis, and Orbis said, this isn't good enough. And the person said to them, well, what do you want me to do? They said, just make up stuff. Just bring it up to the top of your head. This is major. Now, some people go, well, gee, well, where's that guy? Guess what? We're working on that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, but I'm not going to hold off on that information, right? I'm saying this is
and
what.
Of course, I've called this the dirty dossier. I've called it the filthy fiction, and they continue to parade that around. We have seen how they paid to put this out. We've seen that there's no corroborating evidence on any of this stuff. It all looks like it was made up, and now you've got people telling you they were told just compose something.
And think about that. That really is a game changer in this, because if Orbis was telling people to just make stuff up, if they said that explicitly, then we know. And by the way, Andre, who's the whistleblower here, he's given me more information. Does that make sense? So I know more than we're reporting now, but I wanted to get this out and on the record because this is a person who's very credible. By the way, Andre was part of the Ukrainian government. He, again, supported the Maidan. He was part of something called the Auto-Maidan. It was very easy to look up this guy's resume and see who he was. He's a completely legitimate source that actually nobody has disputed what he's saying about Chalupa, for instance, because they can't, right? You showed the WikiLeaks email. That's proven. And now when he tells me stuff, and he's told me some other things that are shocking, by the way, that we're going to bring out slowly. We're doing it as quickly as we can, but obviously the goal, but this whistleblower in Ukraine right now, who wrote material for Orbis and was told to make it up, obviously we're trying to get him on the record, but it's a slow process because there's a lot of fear.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look at how, these are people in the intelligence community here in the U.S. as well as in the U.K. And we have seen how they use this circular planting of stories, and they would give some stuff anonymously to a press outlet, and then they would use that as a reference to get a FISA report. All they wanted to do was to get an investigation started because they knew that if they could get an investigation started, they would be able to get into, I think what they want to do is get a process crime with financial information. As I've said, the IRS is so complicated. Foreign financial transactions are complicated. Federal Election Commission contribution rules are very complicated. If they can get something where they can make it up or whatever to get in there to try to get that financial information, they can get a process crime.
And the fear is real because do you know who Pablo Miller is, David?
No.
Okay, I would urge
Pablo
everybody.
Miller, wasn't he working with Christopher Steele to recruit?
He worked with Christopher Steele at Orbis, and he was the guy who recruited Sergei Skripal.
Yep, that's right.
Sergei Skripal, who was poisoned. So the fear is real here.
That's right. And Skripal gets poisoned right as everybody's starting to look very closely at the connections to this dossier. Yeah, not much of a coincidence there, is it? Thank you so much for joining us, Lee Stranahan. You can find him at citizenjournalismschool.com. That's our broadcast for today.
We're bringing back one of the biggest fan-favorite formulas we've ever offered with even better ingredients: Ultimate Bone Broth. InfoWars Life is proud to bring you a powerhouse bone broth formula to help push you to your limits. This incredible formula will help you get the most out of your workout with the power of ultra high-quality bone broth, one of the most popular health trends on the planet. Built with more than 7 different superfoods and crucial compounds, Ultimate Bone Broth will help support your healthy muscles, digestion, tendons, and ligaments, while also supporting your body's fight against free radicals. This incredible chicken bone broth formula contains time-tested ingredients such as turmeric root, chaga mushroom, goji berry powder, bee pollen, and alfalfa herb powder to support your body. It's time to experience what Ultimate Bone Broth can do for you. Get a bottle of the all-new version of a fan-favorite product today at InfoWarsStore.com.